Welcome to the January 12th, 2015 Washougal City Council Workshop meeting, our first meeting of the year. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger, Councilmember McDaniel,
Here.
Councilmember Wagner,
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee,
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker,
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
Councilmember Voger indicated that he may not be able to be here this evening, attending some meetings over in the city of Vancouver. First item on the agenda is an opportunity for individuals to comment to council. So I would open the floor up for that. I know we do have, potentially we've got some folks here for the employment center changes, and I would ask if you can please hold those comments until we have Mitch make the presentation to council, so we keep it all in the same context in there. And then we certainly have that set to go to a public hearing as well for a more formal hearing of comments as well. So with the exception of that item, are there any members of the public that would like to address council? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Rittenhouse with Friends of the Columbia Gorge. I think you probably all recognize me. I just wanted to say a few things about the workshop we had at the very tail end of last year with BNSF. There were just a couple of things that the BNSF representative said that disturbed me, and I wanted to clarify some points. The first was he talked about the explosions and said that the trains don't explode, that an explosion has a shock wave and a number of other things, and said he didn't want to get too technical, but that a lot of the concerns about this had been blown out of proportion. Well, the fact of the matter is they do explode. There's two different kinds of explosions. There's detonations and deflagrations. What he was talking about was a detonation, like what a bomb does. But, you know, a flashbang also detonates, and flashbangs aren't very dangerous. So what's important isn't just whether your shock wave moves faster than the speed of sound or not. It also matters how much fuel is behind the explosion. And when we're talking about these trains, we're talking about a vast amount of force and fuel behind it. So, you know, a deflagration can be like a campfire, but it can also be a giant fireball. And, you know, I don't think the people in Lac Megantic, the families of the people who died, care very much that their loved ones were killed by a deflagration and not a detonation. I don't think that matters much to them. I don't think it'll matter much to the people. And it made me very concerned because it made me think that BNSF isn't really taking this all that seriously. And I was very disturbed by his comments around that. The other thing he said, which is slightly unrelated to the oil trains, but for some reason coal came up, and he said that he knows of no complaints about coal dust in the Columbia River Gorge, but we are suing BNSF for violations of the Clean Water Act because of their coal dust getting off of their trains and onto the land and into the water. So they certainly do know about many of complaints about coal dust. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 points. Thank you both very much, and I encourage you to keep working hard on the resolution, which sounds like it's going pretty well, and just another pitch to keep in there and ask to the governor not to grant permits for any new oil terminals, because that's the best method we have on the local and state level of preventing an increase, at least, in new oil trains. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Good evening.
I'm Robert Innes, and I live at 428 West Dogwood in Washougal. And I also want to comment on BNSF's presentation. I fully agree with what Ryan had to say about the volatility of Bakken oil cargoes. They're still very dangerous, even if they burn more than they explode. The BNSF representatives also described a number of state safety improvements that would make trains less hazardous, such as the introduction of new, less hazardous tank cars. The important thing to remember about that is that it is not a done deal. The federal regulation requiring that has not yet been issued, and undoubtedly there are dozens, if not hundreds, of K Street lobbyists in Washington, D.C. trying to water down that draft regulation right now. So for things like that to happen, and it's the same thing with issues like the speed at which oil trains can travel, both out in open areas and urban areas. They can reduce it, but to stay reduced, it's going to take some continued pressure from the public, from affected communities, for the regulators to actually follow through and implement the regulations in a way that makes a significant difference. So I think for that purpose, it's really important that Washougal join other communities like Vancouver and Stevenson in passing a resolution that includes opposition to the oil terminal in Vancouver, because that's really the best lever that we have, we meaning the communities along the rail line, have to get Governor Inslee and maybe some people at the federal level to think about the problems that oil train traffic creates for communities along the rail lines. And then maybe, only if there's pressure from the communities is somebody at the state and federal level really going to think seriously about creating some programs that will mitigate the problems that are being created for communities along the way. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, my name's Ken Navidi. I live at 2413 Southeast 283rd in Camas. And real quickly, I know you asked us to refrain from the EC until Mitch's presentation, but I've got a kid who's probably not going to make it through this presentation. And I just want to say I did write a part of what we've submitted, so it's pretty much here in writing. I've got other people that can talk with us as well. We just basically added some additional uses and removed some other uses, so we appreciate the opportunity to at least submit it in writing. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
Keith Brown, 211 Malfate Tracks, Washougal, not in the city of Washougal, actually just over the county line in Skamania County.
You're fine.
Since the Burlington Northern Santa Fe presentation, I attended the Stevenson City Council meeting, and they were discussing that presentation. And part of that discussion was some council members asking, what can we do? We can't stop the trains from coming through and carrying the oil. And what I said to them is what I'm going to say to you. I value your expertise as representatives of the community. And I know that this community has invested heavily in the future of this community, made very wise decisions. And where you can legislate and make rules and control it, you do it. This is an instance where, yes, you can't legislate, you can't control it, but you can influence it. Because ultimately, whether the terminal in Vancouver gets built or not is a political decision. Governor Inslee is going to make that decision. And if you join other communities, City of Stevenson passed a very strong resolution asking Governor Inslee not to approve, not to move forward with all these oil terminals, because that's the only thing that can be done. Currently, there are 19 trains a week that come through carrying oil. If nothing is done, there will be 19 trains a day coming through carrying oil. And regardless of what Burlington Northern says about, we don't know how many are going to come through, they've got the same information that the state has. And the state indicates if all of the oil terminals are built, there will be 19 trains coming through carrying oil through here. And that increases all the problems that I'm sure you've talked about in your subcommittee and that you will talk about. I would just urge you to take a position of opposition to the oil terminal, to whatever level you can become interveners in that process. I sat through the whole intervention process for the Whistling Ridge. It makes a difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just want to add a couple of words. My name is Nina Thrun. I live in Camas, just next door to you. So I think we have the same problems and same solutions. I would just want to mention, as I work in clinical research, there's been a lot of research about noise and its effect on health in general, and I do have some references I can give to you afterwards. I would like to emphasize, we're talking about slowing down the trains to make them, quote unquote, safer, perhaps less hazardous, it would be more correct. So if we're talking about potentially 19 trains per day, how much would that noise, for what percentage of time would that noise occur? It's going to greatly increase the time that we're going to be hearing those trains that will affect all the communities along the tracks. So that will affect health, particularly cardiovascular health, coronary diseases. But also, just a sort of side point, it would affect property values, I would think, which will affect all your income in terms of taxes. So that was just something I did want to point out. Of course, we've talked about the at-grade crossings as well. They're going to be blocked for so much longer if the trains are going slower, and of course the increased number of trains. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to address council at this time? Okay. Moving along, we do have a presentation this evening, Clark County's draft 5-year consolidation plan. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Rebecca Royce. I am with Clark County in the Department of Community Services, and I am in the housing and affordable housing and homelessness programs. And HUD requires us for our CDBG, our Consolidated Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnerships Fund, to have a consolidated plan, and it has to be updated every 5 years. So we are currently in that process, and we will be submitting it to HUD this year in May. I want to be clear that these funds are for the Clark County outside of the City of Vancouver. The City of Vancouver does get their own jurisdiction. They get their own funding. So this is for all of the smaller cities and then the unincorporated areas of Clark County. So I want to just give you some information about how the programs work and who gets funding, who's affected by CDBG and home funding. This chart is the Clark County area median income, and it gives you an idea. CDBG funds can only serve folks or households that meet 80% of the area median income. So we're looking at a single person who would need to make less than $38,850 per year. A family of 4 would need to make less than $55,500. Home funding is a little bit more strict. And it's a little bit more complicated, but it's 60% for the most of their programs, and so you can see that that's quite a bit lower for income that they can earn to receive benefits from our programs. CDBG specifically has 3 national objectives that need to be that at least one of them has to be met to be eligible for funding. The first is limited clientele, and these are individuals or households that are presumed low mod income, so there's not much that we have to do as far as verifying that they meet the national objective. The second is through housing. So what would need to be done for a project that is going through this national objective for funding, they would have to actually document each household's income and verify that they meet 80% or low area median income. And this would be homeownership type programs, rehab programs for homes, TBRA or tenant-based rental assistance. Those are the kinds of programs that can be funded under that. The third is area benefit, and this is through the census and block group data, or can be done through a survey. So this map shows all of Clark County, excluding the City of Vancouver's information. The areas in green indicate census tracts and block groups that have been identified by HUD through the American Community Survey as meeting the 80%, that 51% of the homes in a block group make 80% of the area median income or lower. So we can do projects in this area such as infrastructure or sidewalks without worrying about the income that HUD has already determined that they are eligible. The ones that are have the slashed lines through them, those are low mod income exception area. HUD takes a look at all of the information and makes sure that there are plenty of areas in each jurisdiction that can qualify for the funding through the area benefit. What happens is that many jurisdictions do only have a few that actually meet the criteria. So every year they take a look at the data and they create a spreadsheet and make sure that there's a number of extra block groups that qualify. This data changes every year. So if a jurisdiction or a block group qualifies this year, if they're close to that exception criteria, they may not qualify for next year. What we can also do, which is a little bit more work, and actually Washougal is doing one right now, is an income survey for a specific service area within a block group or crossing block groups. And what we do is we actually do a survey of each of the households and see if they earn less than the 80% area median income. For a survey to work, 51% of those households need to make under the 80% of the area median income. They cannot go on our exception criteria, which is right now, I believe, about 45% of the homes need to meet the 80% area median income. This map is just a little bit zoomed in on the Washougal and Camas area, so you can see that there's quite a few areas, but they're more the industrial and areas that you're not going to have too many housing type programs going on. But there are some areas in there that do qualify. And then the project right now is the J Street project, which is in the process of completing the survey to make sure that it qualifies for funding. It was awarded funding last year, but now we have to go back and verify that it does actually meet the criteria. So here's some information about Clark County as a whole. So this is an interesting chart. What this is showing is that median income has risen approximately 9% between 2007 and 2014, and the fair market rent has risen about 25%. However, in that same time frame, the median home price has declined 14%. And essentially what's happening is that housing prices are increasing 3 times as fast as incomes are. So housing is getting more and more expensive for our households. This is Washougal specific information about for income on homeowners and renters, comparing the two. So looking at this chart, there's over half of the homeowners in Washougal are earning 100% or above the area median income, which is great. And that's very similar to Clark County as a whole. But over half of all the renter households in Washougal are earning less than 80% of the area median income, which is also similar to Clark County as a whole. But you can see that a lot of the renters are paying a higher proportion of their income towards their housing costs. So this actually shows the cost burden for renters in Washougal. So when we're considering this, HUD pays very close attention to cost burden for households. And what they include in the cost of housing is the contract rent and then utilities for renters. For homeowners, it's a little bit different. There's the mortgage, there's utilities, there's association fees if they apply, insurance and real estate property taxes are also included in that. The HUD considers a housing affordable if the homeowner or the tenant is paying approximately 30% or below of their income towards their housing costs. Anything above that, they're considered cost burden. And you can see here that most of your your renters that earn over 100% of the area median income are paying an affordable rent, whereas many of the renters earning less than 30% of the area median income are cost burdened at over 50%. So they are paying more than half of their income towards their housing costs. What's going to happen is if they have a catastrophic event, such as a medical emergency or an auto repair, they're at a higher risk of losing their housing because they don't have the money to pay for both of those expenses at one time. This is the same chart just talking about owners. And the one thing to note about owner cost burden is that a lot of households, not a lot, but some households already have paid off their mortgage, and so they're really only having to pay their taxes and association fees, which makes home ownership a little bit more affordable for some households. But you can see that people earning over 100% of area median income, some are still cost burden at over 50% of their income. So their housing is a little bit higher than what their income is bringing in. So this chart is kind of breaking down the information we just looked at in a little bit more specific information. So this is really showing that the percent of renter households by the income range. So 0 to 30% income is approximately 20% of your renters. So 20% of the renters in Clark County make 0 to 30% of the area median income range. And then you have approximately 39% that make 80% or higher for income. And this breaks it down by rental units. So you can see that the percent of units that have rent that would be affordable to households are in that income range. So many homeowners, or renters, I'm sorry, in Clark County make earn the 50 to 80%. So they're still cost burdened. Quite a bit of them are cost burdened. And then this is just a comparison of the two charts showing the homeowners and the rentals. So you can see that the ability to find housing in the 50 to 80, that applies to the 50 to 80% range is quite off. So this moves into our homelessness information. This is information from our point-in-time count from 2014. Our next point-in-time count will be at the end of this month. This chart is showing that there's a definite decline in the number of people that are homeless at the point-in-time count, but it is still quite a need to find housing for those who are homeless in our area. The reasons that we've been having some declining counts is we have gotten additional funding through the county from the document recording fees. So anytime a house is sold or refinanced, there's a piece of those document recording fees that come specifically for homeless programs to find housing, pay for the shelters and things like that. In 2005, it was when we had our first homeless plan, so we actually had a focus on what do we need to do to start looking at the data to really move towards ending homelessness. And there's been better coordination among the service providers to really work on homelessness as an issue. When we do the point-in-time count, we look at numbers from all of the shelters. They report to us. We also go out and do a survey. There's many volunteers that go out into the community, and they go to known homeless camps, and they just walk through the streets to see if they can find anyone that identifies as homeless. They're given a survey. And then the third way we get information is through Project Homeless Connect, which is always done on the same day as the point-in-time count. And there's several service providers that are available at one spot to help and to provide services to people who identify as being homeless, and so they can get them counted at that time. It's not perfect. It's nearly impossible to imagine the idea of being able to count every homeless person, but it does give us a really good idea of what's going on in our community, and we can break it down by area in Clark County. So out from the 2014 homeless point-in-time count, so these are all self-identified numbers. So 9% identified as being chronically homeless individuals, and this would mean that they've had multiple episodes of homelessness over the last 2 years, or they've been homeless for the last year. 17% of the people identified as having a severe mental illness. 8% identified as having a chronic substance abuse issue. 7% identified as being a veteran, and 17% identified as being a victim of domestic violence. One other note is that 72% of the persons in homeless families with children who are homeless were under the age of 18, so the majority of them are the youth in the family. So we are coming to all of the city councils and to the general public to ask for feedback on our draft priority needs for our consolidated plan. We have 3 priority needs that we put forth in the plan with a few different specific items to try to target those goals. The main priority needs are affordable housing development and preservation, community and neighborhood sustainability, and the prevention and alleviation of homelessness. The first priority need, we've specifically targeted an increase in housing supply in the urban growth area that's affordable to households earning 60% or less of the area median income. That is what one of the highest needs in our community is affordable housing. One of the ACE has been very productive in Washougal, and so they have recently developed new apartment complexes. They've purchased apartment complexes that were about to go off the market and be taken away from the affordability list. And they are rehabbing all of those apartments right now, and then they'll be moving everybody back in. So they've been a great agency to have working out here in Washougal. They're a great advocate. They are known now more as REACH. They've combined with REACH, which is a Portland agency. The second is preserving housing, and we do this through ACE with their rehabilitation, but we also do this through our homeowner rehab program, and that's where we provide grants and loans to homeowners so that they can stay in their housing. Sometimes it's just they need a roof repaired. Sometimes it's they need accessibility to be able to get into their home, maybe a ramp to the home, maybe it's the grab bars in the restroom, and that way people can stay within their homes and don't have to move out of them. The third is we promote home ownership. We recently provided funding to Proud Ground in a home ownership program where they families that qualify can purchase a home, and there's rehabilitation money along with that so that they can get a lower cost home, fix it to what it'll meet their needs, and then they have a home that's affordable to them. The second goal is the community and neighborhood sustainability. And this is your public facility, so we've done some upgrades to the restrooms here. Senior centers in Camas, those are the types of programs or projects that would qualify. The second is community infrastructure, and this is our sidewalks. This is what the J Street project is focusing on, is putting sidewalks and doing sewer line and water line repairs to bring them up to code and make sure that they're going to work well going into the future. And then the third goal is economic vitality, and that's going to be your economic development programs, entrepreneurship type programs. The third goal is the alleviation of homelessness, and we tie this directly with our 10-year homeless plan. We have gone through a complete revamp, and with the 10-year homeless plan, it is currently being drafted right now. The current plan that is in place focuses on the types of services that can be provided, such as prevention services to keep people in their homes if they're at risk of being evicted, permanent supported housing to get people that are needing permanent supported housing for long periods of time, things like that, shelter services. We're going to focus now on populations. It does not mean that other populations will not be served, but these are through public period comments and working through the public, they've identified 3 areas that they want to focus on. Families with children, which makes sense when there's 72% of the kids are homeless. Unaccompanied youth, and then the chronically homeless. The fourth goal is going to be the system-wide improvement, and that's basically just to make sure that we're staying on track, we're keeping the data, we know what we're doing, and we're going in a direction that we know is serving everyone. So those are going to be our 4 goals with the new homeless plan. So we're asking everyone to go take a survey for us at our website, www.clark.wa.gov/CDBG. It's a very simple survey. I think there's 5 or 6 questions on there, and it just is helping to give us feedback on what your community needs and what your community is looking for so that we can make sure that we direct the funding in that direction over the next 5 years. So I appreciate your time. If you'd like to provide feedback directly to me, you can email me, you can call me, or you can write me a letter. I still like to read those every once in a while too. Yes.
First of all, I'm glad to see you measuring outcomes. That's the only meaningful measure of a program like this. But when you say you're going to measure number of persons assisted, this is a meaningless measure. The meaningful measure is the number of people who went from homeless to being in a home.
I'm involved in the ROMA, which is results-oriented management and accountability, and that is from the national level. It's actual federal mandate for several different funding sources, such as Community Services Block Grant, and it's very much about outcome focus, and it's looking at families over a continuum rather than just looking at the services provided. You're exactly correct. We need to look at outcomes, not outputs, but we still need to know how many people we are serving. So it is a small piece of it, but we do want to open up and we want to look at making sure we do come with outcomes, what the change is. That's what the outcome means.
The other thing is, I see suffused throughout your presentation the terms sustainable and sustainability. Can you define that for me?
So HUD wants to make sure that they're putting money into projects that are going to last for a very long time. And specifically with the home program, there's an affordability period that when we give money to, say, ACE for the acquisition of an apartment complex, we require that they keep those apartments at an affordable rate for, depending on how much funding we give them, 20, 25 years. Sometimes it's a little bit shorter if we don't give very much money invested into the project. But that is to keep those projects, one, sustainable, rehab, make them usable for a longer period of time, and also keep them affordable so that people can get in there and rent that are earning the lower incomes in our community.
Excellent definition, thank you. I see that term bandied about a lot, but that's the first time I've seen a decent definition of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for Rebecca?
Can I have your phone number?
I have my card, yes I do.
There it is. Email works. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Good luck with the rest of
Well
the
done.
cities. Were we number one?
No,
Okay.
actually, this is my last one. So I've been to several. Me and Pete Monroe split up. A lot of them have been to different advisory boards and the city councils. But I think I'm done.
It's nice of you to save the best till last.
That's right, exactly.
Well,
Actually,
nope.
me and Pete fought over who was going to do Washougal, and I won. So
What was it, arm wrestling?
no, he beat me at that.
Oh, okay.
Well, I know you don't have a vote when it comes down to the CDBG projects, but thank you for all of your support that you've given the city in the last few years.
Oh, we
are
appreciate
very
it.
fortunate to have been recipients, so.
Great, thank you so much.
And thank you for your support of Ace and Reach as well. The project that they have underway and the project that they already finished have been phenomenal for
They're
our
a
community.
fantastic organization to work with. Leah is she knows way more than what she gives out that
Yep.
she knows, so.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mitch, let's talk about some zoning.
Happy New Year, Council.
Thanks. Happy New Year to you.
You're filling out your beard.
I went with the whole Santa thing. I really got carried away, I think. Okay, employment center regulations. First of all, I think it's important that we talk about why we're talking about employment center regulations. So a little bit of history. Going back to July of last year, we had a request for annexation that came to the council. This is the map that we ultimately ended up looking at for annexation. And the north 65 acres of that is currently zoned business park within Clark County with a urban holding designation over the top, but we've identified it to be employment center. Not having those regulations in place, we want to have those regulations in place before we annex that property into the city. So this is really why we're talking about employment center at this time. So the steps that we work, staff, we worked with the petitioners based on your recommendation, which was that map that we just looked at. Then we went off to develop the employment center regulations, get those through Planning Commission, bring those back to you, and then after that, we'll go back to the petition for annexation and work with them and come back in front of you for the annexation process. So where we are right now is that middle one. We've been through Planning Commission. They have a recommendation, which I'll go over with you. But that's why we're talking about employment center at this time. So what does employment center do? It establishes regulations for the zoning designation EC, which we're establishing. Remember, currently there are no properties within the city of Washougal that are zoned employment center. We don't have any. These regulations would only apply to properties that are currently within our urban growth boundary, but within Clark County's jurisdiction, and they're currently zoned business park. They have an urban holding designation over the top of that, which basically precludes development at the business park level until annexation into the city of Washougal. This is why we're have employment center regulations. So I'm looking at the area, the map, our fine city. We have in the northwest portion, we have some area that we've identified as employment center, and then in the northeast portion of the town. The northwest portion, we're looking at approximately 185 acres in this area that is zoned employment center. And looking in the northeast, we have about 230 acres on that side that is zoned employment center. So what do the regulations consist of? Obviously, we have a purpose statement. We identify those uses, permitted and conditional. We have development standards, which I'll go into a little bit, and then performance standards related to that as well. Touching on each of these briefly, I'm not going to read the entire purpose statement, but it's in your packet and it's in the first page of the proposed amendments, but it's intended to provide for a wide range of employment opportunities. And we were going to look at development standards, performance standards, park light setting, avoidance of nuisances, compatibility with abutting zones, pedestrian-oriented, auto-oriented as well. So, kind of a broad statement. And this is really what the Planning Commission looked at when they were looking at development of uses. Uses that specifically, I'm not going to get into all of them, but we've identified within the table 1842-1. Those are the uses that we've identified as permitted, and C as conditional. Uses that aren't listed within the employment center but are listed elsewhere within the zoning code, those are then would be prohibited within the employment center. So if there's a use that's identified in industrial and it's not listed here, it's not allowed within the employment center district. Typically, we're looking at service-oriented businesses in this area, some manufacturing, and some limited retail associated with those permitted uses. The development standards should be pretty familiar to you. They were, in fact, the ones that we utilized for the Steigerwald Commerce Center development agreement, which you'll recall that was then used for the development of the Parker's Landing development agreement. So those standards should be you should be fairly familiar with them, but again, we get into dimensional and setbacks, which I'll actually talk about in a little more detail when I get to the Planning Commission's discussion. Vehicle access, curb cuts, you see them there, the gamut, solid waste, signs, fences. So we address all those issues in terms of development standards within the proposed regulations. Performance standards, we only identified the two. There was more that were in the employment center, but really they wanted to identify noise and smoke. We wanted to make sure that there was at least a reference to the state law that we that adhere to in terms of noise, and then the Southwest Clean Air Agency in terms of smoke. We weren't necessarily anticipating intense uses along those lines, but we wanted to have those in there as well. So getting into recapping the public hearing and comments in front of the Planning Commission, there was this general opposition to employment center, the zoning designation in general. Staff tried, and I think that the Planning Commission did as well, to let the public know that that wasn't, the actual designation of the properties wasn't in front of us at the time. The properties are currently zoned business park. We want them as employment center when they do come in, ultimately come into the city. But we were only looking at the regulations for those properties. It's not to say that that is not a conversation that can be had at a later date. It just wasn't in front of the Planning Commission. And in fact, it's not in front of the City Council either. We're only looking at adopting those regulations right now. We can have that conversation about zoning, as you all are aware. Zoning, especially zoning that's, once it comes into the city, it's within your authority then to look at and to modify at that time. But that wasn't what the Planning Commission was tasked with at this time, nor is that in front of you. Infrastructure, it actually only came up about roads, but as the council's aware, we have a transportation capital facility plan that addresses areas of development within the city. We also have sewer and water. You'll recall from the annexation presentation when the city engineer, Mr. Charles, was here. He had the maps up of the water and the sewer and how we could serve this area. And there's some significant costs associated with those improvements, and we're aware of that. It's that, and we made it known that development at that time, if development came in, they would be on the hook for putting those improvements in. So, but we do have a plan in place for the development of the area. Opposed to the annexation, not necessarily the annexation that's in front of you, but opposed to their properties, particularly being annexed, probably that area just east of the proposed annexation now, there was concern that they would be annexed in, and I assured them that that wasn't what we were discussing as part of this annexation that is in front of the council currently. There was this question about, is there a need for employment center? There was a comment made from, I think it was Mr. Navidi, that stated that Paul Dennis had made a comment that Washougal had 7 to 10 years of employment lands within the city. I don't know the accuracy of that, but it's important to remember that the urban growth boundary is our 20-year horizon. It's a 2035 plan that we're looking at. So while we may have a 7 to 10 year time frame, this is beyond that 7 to 10 year time frame. So we do have a need for employment center. There was a question, this kind of general notion, do they have any say in what can go there? And we, staff and the Planning Commission, made it known that this is the opportunity, this is the time to talk about the specific uses. And there was a couple that were talked about specifically, which I'll get into. And in your Dropbox, there was a comment letter that was submitted earlier this evening that gets into a lot of that. I'm gonna leave that on the table for right now. I believe that party is here, and then they'll walk through that, and we can discuss that further. There was a comment made that they would prefer recreational and educational uses to be utilized within the area, specific uses. Should there be a park, and is there any planned parks? Council's aware, in 2013 we updated our parks capital facility plan. We identified, in fact, a 20 to 25 acre park in this general area. It's within the plan. So yes, we are planning for parks within the area. We haven't identified specific property, as Council's aware, but it is within our capital facility plan for parks. Setbacks and building heights, and I'm going to throw views on there. This was the Planning Commission spent the most time on this one at the hearing. Initially, the setbacks within the district were going to be 75 feet when adjacent to a residential district, and then but you could go to 25 feet if you did some sort of earthen berm with some screening and landscaping on top of that, all at the discretion of the community development director. I let the Planning Commission know that I wasn't thrilled with that idea of having that discretion, having utilized that same kind of provision in my earlier life with the county. I found that it really didn't work for anyone involved. It was very contentious, always contentious. You had some ongoing maintenance issues that were constantly you're dealing with, and so Fortunately, I think that the Planning Commission heeded that advice and came up with an alternative. What they are looking at, and what they propose to you, is that the setbacks adjacent to a residential district would be 35 feet. For a building 35 feet tall. And so they took the height of a house, and typically it's 35 feet, that's the maximum height that we allow. And they increased the setback for it, so they said 35, if you have a 35-foot tall building, you can be 35 feet off the property line. Then from that point, any building over 35 feet, you're doubling your height for your setback. So the building height within the district, maximum building height, is 75 feet. It's proposed to be 75 feet. So in theory, if you built a 75-foot tall building, you would be 150 foot off of a residentially zoned property. So that was their attempt to try to address the concerns that they heard from the public related to compatibility issues. Now, again, the comment letter that was submitted goes at that a little bit more too, but I'll leave that again on the table until those folks have a chance to comment on that. The other specific use related to mini storage, the initial use was mini storage without ancillary RV and boat storage. And a party made a request that it should include the RV and boat storage. And then there was a public, another comment related to that crime is sometimes associated with those uses. And so what the Planning Commission did is, in looking at that, they stated that while they were fine with the accessory RV and boat storage, they wanted it fully enclosed. And so they said, yeah, you can have that, but you have to have it fully enclosed within a building. And they left it as a permitted use, because they did talk a little bit about making it a conditional use as well. In terms of the crime, they felt that they didn't have any evidence in front of them that would support that, and that they were fine with making that recommendation to you. I do know we may hear some more comments about that in the public comment period portion as well. But that kind of, in a very large nutshell, is really kind of the comments that we took in with the Planning Commission. Ultimately, their recommendation was to approve the proposed amendments as they modified them and as they are presented to you this evening. So the recommended action in front of you is for approval of the consent agenda, set a public hearing for January 26th at 7 p.m. on the Employment Center regulations.
David.
This is our old bugaboo, Mitch.
Yes, sir.
Ever since I was on the Planning Commission, you and I have been talking about this. I think you know what's coming. In the presentation that you sent to us, one of the things that I picked up was that this is going to limit parking facilities for automobiles. In your presentation tonight, you indicated that it's both auto and pedestrian friendly. I caught the pedestrian friendly, but I specifically caught a provision that said they were going to limit the number of automobile parking places as a matter of policy. And that concerns me, because the people of Washougal and the people who visit Washougal, the primary means of transportation for them to get to employment centers and retail centers is the automobile.
I don't believe that there is anything, there was in fact, in the last sentence of the purpose statement, we state that this district encourages development which is pedestrian oriented while at the same time providing adequate auto facilities. I don't believe that there's anything in here that specifically limits the parking.
As I understood it, it was the philosophy of this to limit parking.
No, that's not that.
So it all hinges on the definition of adequate.
Yeah. And again, you know, we had that conversation for a lot of times when we were at Planning Commission. Is that you know, let the business owner determine how much parking they're going to need. We can set what we believe, we think that the minimum are. They want to do more than that. There's nothing that we have that says you can't do more than that. We never went down that path.
As long as we're flexible on that, I have no objection.
Yeah, and this section, this code provision points back to what our current standards are related to parking in 1852. So it doesn't do anything different, and it doesn't, in the preamble and the purpose, it doesn't, state any, I don't believe it states anything that is anti-automobile at all. I think it says
Well,
providing adequate auto facilities.
The downtown area is a very good example of how to solve that problem, underground parking. I love it. I use it all the time. So as long as we're not limiting the transportation means that people use to go everywhere, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I don't believe that there was anything in the regulations or in the design standards that specifically do anything related to limitation of parking. Well, what it does do, I know that it gets at, if the more parking you start putting in, the more landscaping you gotta start putting in. So there are consequences of putting more parking in, but it's to, it's really to.
I would like
Don't
to,
evacuate the building.
I would like to hear what my colleague across the table here has to say, because he's very knowledgeable in these areas. And I guess my question, Paul, is the EC designation a good idea?
I think so. I have to admit, I haven't really thought this through a whole lot. I haven't talked to Mitch about this. I haven't talked to people about this. The fundamental fact that we keep trying to deal with is, how do you pay for the city, given that a single-family residence costs more in services than it provides in revenue. On the other hand, retail provides more revenue. Industrial uses are all over the map, anywhere between a lot more and a lot less. Depends on the industrial uses, and typically the industrial uses that are very heavy users of water and wastewater are the ones that end up being more expensive. So, but the idea, one of the things that you're trying to do here is everybody looks at, throughout not only Clark County, but the entire region, at what happened up on the backside of Prune Hill. Whether it was Prune Hill or Camas Meadows, that what they did is they effectively designated an employment center. It was, some years ago, it wasn't at this level of detail. Probably the most important thing that they did was generate minimum lot sizes. You can't build an underwriter's laboratory on 5-acre lots. You need to create big enough chunks that you can create big enough businesses.
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, I think something needs to be done.
Okay.
I have to admit, I have not looked at this in any detail, and I want to speak with Mitch and some of the other people who know more about this subject than I do.
Which is why I'm interested in your ideas.
Yeah, one of them,
We both served on the planning commission.
right, one of the people I will try to talk to is Nan Hendrickson.
Yes, absolutely.
In general, I think we need employment center. Whether this is the way to go about it, my initial response is to defer to the planning commission. On the other hand, I'm not aware that we have anyone on, I think the focus of planning commission at this point, the members are more involved with residential real estate and residential development. I'm not aware of anyone has experience in industrial, but some with retail, if I remember correctly.
Reinhardt the chair is a land use attorney and on the industrial side and commercial side.
Oh, okay, I thought he was title company and compliance attorney, but that's.
I think he runs the gamut.
Okay.
I guess my question is if I may, I'm trying to figure out what the what specifically is the question right now, is whether or not we need.
Well, the answers so far don't get to what the question is that you have, David. And this isn't, what you have in front of you with the employment center designation and what the county has charged us with is significantly different than what Camas went out to do when we developed and annexed Prune Hill.
And my question really gets to, is the employment center the designation we want?
Okay, so I guess.
Well, that's a designation that the county has given us.
Well, it's currently zoned business park. It is zoned business park with the urban holding on it. We, back in '05, we said, well, that's fine in Danny, but when it comes into Washougal, we want employment center. We didn't develop regulations for employment center because, quite honestly, we didn't see it coming in at this time. And the only reason that we're talking about it right now is for this annexation. Okay. But you'll recall that, you know, that Washougal and all the small cities, all the cities, are working right now with the county in our state mandated update to the Growth Management Act due 2016. We are well down that path, and I've been in front of this council and asked about how are we going to proceed, you know, and my direction to this point has been status quo. We're not going to, you know, we can just dust it off. We do not need to spend any money. We don't need to go back and do a bunch of analysis, because the population allocation that we got for 2035 is actually less than what we got, you know, back in '05. So we don't need to do anything. And so we took the approach at your direction that we're not looking at designations. We're not answering those questions right now. We're dusting off the plans really to be in compliance with state, the mandated state update. So we haven't, while I think that it's a worthwhile question, I don't think that now is the time to have that discussion. I think that we will have that discussion when we, at some point, when we look at, do we have to expand the boundary? Probably the next time that we do the state requires us to update our entire comp plan again. We may have that discussion. I don't know. Given the improvement requirements that are needed up there, it may not even meet that time frame.
So the EC designation is something that's ours to make, and we could remake it at a later date if we needed to.
Once the property comes into the city of Washougal, it is within your discretion to change it as you see fit. Now, I will make recommendations to you, you know, and again, you can take that and do what you will with it. But that is absolutely correct. Once it's in the city, it is yours to do.
That relieves all my anxiety. Thank you.
Good.
We still have to look at compliance, you know, with GMA. We still have to make sure that whatever population allocation we have enough land for residential. We have enough land for employment. We have enough land for park. All of that stuff we have to look at.
Can you refresh our memory? Is this the Planning Commission's recommendation?
What is in front of you is the Planning Commission's recommendation.
EC
yes.
EC designation.
The EC is what we're calling it. We could call it whatever we want.
Sure.
Once we take that 65 acres in that we're talking about in part of the annexation, those folks need to know can they develop their property. That's what we need these for.
Mitch, if the council didn't adopt EC standards, our ordinance would default to the county's standards and they would become ours by default?
I don't believe that's how it works. If there was some discomfort by the council with employment center regulations something to the extent that we want to look at something completely different or whatnot, then my recommendation at that time would be we don't annex property that's currently identified as business park.
Or you do it with a moratorium.
Or you do it and say, we're gonna slap something else on it until such time that we have those regs in place.
So the goal here is merely to have a public hearing.
Tonight, yes, all you're doing is setting a public hearing. Now, you're gonna hear, and it provided to you within the Dropbox was 2 comment letters that were submitted that I'll let those folks get into. But there's some questions that we'll have to answer as part of that as well.
Great.
So as we change this or identify certain areas we want to change, are we going to be able to tweak it in the future, or this is what will stand?
Oh, no, we can change it all the time.
So, I mean, in certain things where it says park-like setting, is that identified in more detail somewhere else?
No, I mean, the purpose statement is somewhat of a guide of how we, you know, in concert with the design standards, we would go back and say, well, we do need to do a little bit more to really get at what the purpose of this designation is. We didn't get into, you know, that each property has to have X amount of, you know, open space or anything along those lines. We didn't get into that detail.
And so when those details do come, are they gonna go through the planning commission and then come back to us, or are we gonna be involved
Right
in
now,
that
those
process?
details, no, there's none of those details that have been identified to be in there. We're really just looking at establishment of uses with the development standards that we have in place here. I mean, in theory, we could really start getting into, you know, we can start master planning, you know, similar to what was done on Woodburn Hill. It really depends on what extent do we want to go with that. Right now, you know, I look at this as we're getting something in place to facilitate an annexation, and at the council's direction. Do I see employment center development up there? No, I don't see it for a while. And given that we're looking at, as you recall, Rob mentioned, you know, there's a $1.8 million sewer pump station that would really need to go in before, and that's only one of two that have to go in. Not to mention, you know, other infrastructure, roads and whatnot. So I don't. I see this as something that I think that this will make provisions for good development, but to the detail that I think that you're talking about, I don't think that it's there. No.
Okay.
But
I just
the
don't
short
want to
answer-
get left behind and not be able to make those inputs later.
Well, and I
Because
think
a lot of us.
this is the thing, that this is the time. This is the time to do that.
Although to your question of if you adopt these and then you want to add that detail and those levels of detail, yes, they would need to go through the planning commission.
Yes, absolutely, they would have to go back to the
final action.
No, we should say though, Mitch, just to make sure it's clear, there are standards in here. It's not that the developer can go in and if the use is on the list, build it any way they want. There's maximum heights, there are minimum yard requirements, there are landscaping provisions for parking lots, there are certain things they have to do for driveways and pedestrian connectivity, and there are standards if there's a drive-through about how they shield that, and there are provisions around buffers if the property abuts residential use. There's different levels of buffers and how you have to make that buffering. But what I don't know, and it may refer to other parts of the code, Mitch, what do they have to do in those setbacks if it's not a buffer?
It's landscaping, yeah.
So we have some general landscaping requirements. So there are, if someone came in, we don't expect something, but if you annexed the property and then the next day somebody came in with a proposed development and a site plan and could afford to pay for the infrastructure, we would have provisions in place to regulate that development, and it would look like what's happening at Steigerwald.
See, when I think of what I might want there, and I kind of live out in that area, I think of the Camas Industrial Park and wanting to achieve something like that versus what is at the port over there. That, I mean, it's an eyesore. And I think a lot of the people living there residentially wouldn't want that as well. And so I guess that would be where, I don't know if I can do that as a council member, but put my hand in to try and make it look more like what they have in Camas versus what's at the port now.
But
Don't look
that
at
is
the-
your role in,
Yeah.
right now.
But don't look at the existing older part of the port as your benchmark for that. There's
Right.
only been one development that's happened, one building that's happened with the new standards, and that's the brand new Foods and Seasons project on the far
Right, yeah.
right side. But I don't believe that this body of provisions has some of the macro level requirements that would result in the campuses that you see, unless a developer chose to do that. let's see, the minimum lot size in these standards is 20,000 square feet, which is a little bit less than half an acre.
Yeah.
So if you want to see campuses, if that's the desire of the council, then you would have to require aggregation of properties by stipulating a minimum lot size that's much larger than that.
And to give it an idea, when we annexed Prune Hill and put that in place, and it took years. We thought it was going to be easier, but it took years. And what ended up developing and what was envisioned over there was purely to diversify the industrial base of the city of Camas. Not
When you say
residential.
Prune Hill, would you designate, are you talking Lake Road and Ledbetter? Are you talking about that
That's
industrial
included
area?
there. No residential, that came as another part of everything, but it was industrial and diversifying that base. And we literally came up with, I believe the term that we had on it was light industrial country tech, not employment center. And most of what you see in here wouldn't fit inside there.
Right.
The minimum size property you had to have was 200 acres. So Sharp, when they came in on the first one, they own a whole lot of acreage they're never going to use. But that was the minimum acreage. That became a little bit unworkable, and they realized as things went on that there were other uses and other sizes that could happen and be harmonious with the whole thing.
Is that changeable down the road? It's changeable.
Camas did change theirs
Okay.
to significantly smaller. The housing started coming in around it, and that's when we got into, quite frankly, that was right in the middle of all of growth management in the state. And when we got into steep slopes and conservative areas and greenways and everything else, and that's why you see a lot of the homes that you see up there, is then regulations were put in place of how we do that with what's left, because they were all steep slopes and sensitive areas and all of that kind of stuff. But it ended up taking years to be able to get there. I think we had a moratorium on Prune Hill, I want to say, for almost 3 years. And that just went from country rural roads to what you see today. But that was industrial based, light industrial country tech. And the country tech of part of it is what put into place the things like all the landscape berms and the plantings and everything you see around there, so that you could envision right then when it was happening, Sharp sitting right next to Knight's Point, where you had $500,000 homes. You could envision Underwriter Laboratories next to $1 million homes on the lake, and it worked. And that was the whole idea for what went in there. But it got massaged a little bit over the years, and I don't know if they've made any significant changes in the last few years, but in the first probably 10 years, there was some tweaking that happened in there. There was also, though, tremendous stability within the city of Camas as far as the building officials and the planners to be able to take things like adequate landscaping buffers and know what that looked like on a plan and say, yes, this meets it, or this doesn't meet what we're trying to get to. So,
How many acres are there of employment center in this area? It's not a lot.
185.
185.
Right.
so that wouldn't, under Camas's, when we originally started, one plant couldn't even go in.
On the northwest, we have 185. On the northeast, about 230.
Well, I would still think that you could achieve that look
Absolutely.
with those landscape berms, with smaller parcels.
Mhm.
You know, we're talking about the street view, which is important to everybody, and the buffers within what will eventually become residential. And I think that you could still have those smaller parcels in the inner thing, but the surrounding thing that you're seeing.
Yeah, and typically the 20,000 square foot, it wasn't anything magical really about it, but it's typically what we end up with. We'll have a development that'll have a larger, an anchor, if you will, and then they'll have smaller, tenants out, but it'll be all on one site. And then sometimes you get into this issue of ownership, and they want to own this smaller building on this that was developed in the entire site, and so that gives then the developer the flexibility to actually sell off a use that's specifically, specifically already there, ready to go. I don't see someone coming in and buying, and these are large, there's some smaller chunks that are already there identified, but like the 65 acres is actually half of, I think there's maybe 2 other parcels to the east of it, but there's one large chunk of it, and it's the northern portion of that 100-acre piece there. And I don't see someone coming in, buying that, and then just dividing it up into 20,000 square foot lots to try to do some of these uses. It wouldn't work. But what I do see is someone coming in, putting something in there, maybe that would be larger. I mean, if I'm looking at these uses, some sort of larger facility, maybe some sort of pad off the side, and then another one or two off of that. And then at some point, of being able to sell those pieces off. And if they're limited to a 200, 100, 50, 20, 10 acre, they don't have that ability to do that. So that limits them on that side.
Unless we come up with something where they can co-locate on acreage.
And they can. The site, they can all be on that site. It's just that 20,000 gives them the ability to plat off a piece.
Right.
And
while that 20,000, I can't express enough how different this is than what Camus did. While the 20,000 doesn't mean anything in ours, it's just a starting point in there for Camus. The 200 acres was a very important piece because we were looking at that property as industrial base expansion. And the more we took up and said, you have to have these, they wouldn't be homes. And it solved a very large annexation that put it into industrial use and industrial tax base.
I was just looking, where it says landscape screening and it's chain link fences. I mean, I just don't envision that as a new business park, I guess. In that.
Where are you?
It was on your employment center, 18.42. It's
Page number?
Is that the solid waste screening?
above the solid waste.
Above solid waste.
I just had it. It's under the fences, right above salt. Yeah, it was. I'll have to get back to you with that.
Yeah,
But
there's a lot there about solid waste.
it's number 10.
That's fences.
Yeah.
And that's basically, so along arterials, you can't do a fence, so we don't want you, like along 23rd, we don't want to see a bunch of fences along
Right.
there. This also references back to 1848, which is our landscaping and screening, and it talks about in front yards, how much, you typically have to have 15 feet of landscape buffer, trees, shrubs, ground cover, all that stuff. All that stuff still applies. This is stuff that's in addition to those standards.
Okay.
Jennifer?
Can you give me an example of a business that would be 75-foot high space?
Off the top of my head, yeah.
Office.
Yeah, an office building would be.
Right, a multi-level, like businesses and offices and things like that. I can definitely see why the people would be upset with this table of uses, because some of this stuff I just cannot imagine being surrounded by residential and all of a sudden there's, aviation manufacturing going in. I mean, that
was
doesn't seem
actually
to
one
fit.
the Planning Commission specifically wanted to put back on there, given proximity
Really?
to Grove and other things, yes.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So I see most of your designations are permitted rather than conditional.
Yes.
It's interesting to me.
And that's
Why
typically, that's typically what we've tried to get to, especially with the town center, how we said everything's allowed unless we prohibit it. So, and then everything that's then there is, you're not going through a public hearing process. We're trying to streamline that as much as we can. So if we've identified the area's employment center and these are the uses that we want there, we don't need to necessarily run people through a public hearing in order to get that. It's still public comment. We still provide notice. We do all those things, and then we rely on the design standards to get at what it is that we want there.
I don't know. I see more office buildings, a little bit of retail, restaurants. I don't know. It's a lot to take in, and I really need some more time, I think. And I did have a question about the petitioner. people who want to be annexed and they're for their particular properties, did they have any clue the types of businesses they would like to see go in on their property?
The only one that has property that is, and she's here, and I mean, this came up at the hearing as well, but is Zimmerman, and that is, you know, really their reason for annexation is protection, police protection. That's what they wanted. They did, at least they haven't made it known to us of any kind of development that they are looking at. Again, they're very well aware of what the infrastructure costs are and that need to go in there too. So, you know, they're here, so I'll let them comment about whether or not they have any idea about what could go there or they want to see go there.
Joe?
Would you be willing to take me, at least, I don't know if anybody else cares, but on a tour of this area?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll get together and make a time.
There's 2 areas, remember.
Paul?
Couple of things right off the top of my head. My memory is that Washougal City Code prohibits the parking of boats and recreational vehicles on city streets, correct?
Correct.
So it is crucial that we have some kind of off-street parking available for boats and RVs. I forget exactly because I have other things involved on the bill, but I'm paying about $120 a month to park an RV and a boat. And if you make that inside a building, it'll double the cost. And you know, one of the reasons that some of us live here have a lot to do with the Washougal River and the Columbia. And so I'm very concerned by that specific piece. The other thing that kind of leaped out at me is back on performance standards. We mentioned noise and smoke. How about storage tanks and hazardous materials? Do we talk about that at all?
We don't talk about it, but it's still, we still regulate it. And it's
Okay.
the fire marshal regulates a lot of that stuff as well.
Okay.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I think that also in on the comment letter, there's talk about, you know, that we need to say something in here that we will do stormwater. Well, we do stormwater. We have engineering standards that address that. So, you know, trying to put everything in this
Right.
one section. We have other sections that do deal with those kind of things.
Yeah, and frankly, the administrative reason for doing that is that then if you want to change it, you can change it in one place instead of trying to find the 25 places it's mentioned in code that are different, which is a problem that we've had in the past. The other thing I wanted to mention to the people in the room who are property owners, if at some point you want to restrict the uses of your properties, you need to talk to your attorneys about what are called CC&Rs, codes, covenants, and restrictions. You can put a restriction on a deed of sale that stays with the deed in perpetuity, basically. And you could restrict uses that way. The port, for example, has done that on some property over in the kind of the west part of the port area. That's all.
Joyce?
I don't know that it's relevant at this point, but how much, when you talk about putting an infrastructure in there, which is water, sewer, et cetera, what kind of expenses are we talking?
I don't know all of them, but I mean, what I do recall from on the sewer side, that was the pump station, which would be in the northwest corner, which is about $1.8 million currently. I know that there's another one that's needed a little bit further east at some point, but it really gets back into, if you remember Rob talking about where the slopes, where it breaks and where then development occurs. Water's a little bit easier, but we still, at some point, we'll have to have a water tower up there as well, and that's, again, in our water plan as well. Costs, you know.
Tower more, depending on what the uses are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Roadways.
So there's, to say significant costs is probably a understatement.
Is there a way to set this section up where and I know you mentioned that you wanted to streamline it more, but where each potential property could be approved?
That is how it happens. I mean, so if someone,
okay.
yeah, if someone came in with they wanted to do something on that piece of property, they would come in for site plan review. We would then apply all the standards that we have, all the engineering standards, the road standards, all the regulations, these standards, these development standards, and we would do notice to everybody within 500
But as long
feet.
as they adhered to what we had written, it would be an acceptable.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm saying more where we acted as guidance and what actually went there, making us a decision body on what goes there.
Yeah, that's not typically how
Yeah.
we do it.
It gets, if legislative discretion for a site planning process causes you a lot of legal problems with respect to land use adjudication. And so the idea in Washington land use jurisprudence is to develop a body of standards that articulate your vision for your community in areas that you've designated certain zones. And so spend time up front to cast your vision and put your standards in place. And then within different zones, there might be some uses that should be limited, though. A limited number of uses where you think it could be there, but it's got kind of unique impacts. So we need to take a little bit closer look at it, maybe have a public hearing, give some more discretion to the decision maker, which our legal advisors will tell you should be a hearings examiner and not a planning commission or a city council. And those are called conditional uses, and often that's when it's a big institutional use and there's homes around, so schools often, not always, but often have to go through conditional use processes because they bring a lot of impacts with them. Even though we all want a school, they also bring a lot of impacts, a lot of traffic twice a day, and all, 3 times a day, all these different things. But to have a case-by-case, highly discretionary, we'll know it when we see it, up or down review process, I don't know that anyone would buy the ground. There'd be no certainty for investors, and you wouldn't have anybody that would come to do the things you want to do. So at this stage, I think our recommendation is consider what the Planning Commission's put forward. Tonight, all you're doing is setting a public hearing for 2 weeks from now. You have 2 weeks to take a look at this. I know there are folks that are here tonight that want to address you, even though this isn't our formal public hearing. It'd be kind of an informal public hearing, if you would, on preliminary information, and we're about out of time on the workshop, so that might mean it has to wait till 7 for that input, unfortunately. We've heard some of the concerns, and some of the concerns are, will this body of regulations get exactly at the vision we have there? And it looks like there might be a little bit of morphing that would need to happen. And I've made some notes. I know Mitch has got very good at mental notes. We have some of that, and that's certainly something that you could think about after the hearing. And then we see where it goes from there after you've heard from folks.
What do we, David Rose, if you've got access to the schedule, what do we have stacked for the next 2 workshops?
I'd have to look at the schedule. They're full, but we can move things around.
I'm just, with the number of questions and some of the thoughts, and certainly making sure that we've got adequate time for the public, I'm wondering if we want to potentially look at moving that public hearing to the 9th and continue this on the 23rd for workshop again as well.
26th?
So yeah. Well, the 9th would be our first one in February.
No, but 26th, continue it to 26th work session. More discussion at workshop on the 26th. I thought it was the
January 26th.
Mm-hmm.
January 26th, yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing back your public hearing.
Yeah.
And try and get through all the discussions before we get to that formal point of everything.
We have quite a bit of flexibility on the 26th. There's several smaller items, things that the council's workshop late in the year, e-cigarettes, which would be a very short one, another minor administrative item. So we could almost, I don't think we should, but we could almost clear the agenda next time for the workshop. So I think we could accommodate a good chunk of time next week. Now, staff brings stuff in, we're rolling,
Right.
you know, so sometimes 10 days you get, I need this in front of the council right away, and, you know, we'll have to make do. So we could do that if that's the wishes.
I think I want to provide council as much time as possible. This is a big thing.
Yeah, it is.
This is something we don't have on the books. And for all of you that are here that have properties out there and have interests out there, we want to get it right all the way around. So I don't want to continually have you. It's not that we need an audience every week to make us feel good or anything like that, but I want to make sure that we've got plenty of adequate time to really vet these things through and get it something that we all know is hopefully as close as possible, as correct as we can get. Mitch, do you still want to keep your public hearing on the 26th as well?
I wouldn't. What I anticipate, you know, given what was submitted to you and to me earlier today, one, I mean, if council was, you know, had any inclination of looking at that and addressing those issues, those kind of things I think have to go back to our planning commission. So what I was really looking at was probably what is a recommendation that would end up going back to the planning commission to take in some of those comments. Given that, I think that
So did those comments not come up at planning commission at all?
they came up, but not to this degree, not to that specificity and those you know, changing the standards and widths and uses and all that stuff was not contemplated at the planning commission.
Okay.
The thing I was thinking is that you know, if it is ultimately going to end up being remanded back to the planning commission, it may not be a bad idea to have planning commission try to be here and hear that conversation as well. And I'm just thinking that if I let them know about our meeting on the
Do a joint one?
on the 26th and have them planning commission be there as well.
I'm fine with that.
Two thoughts. One is, I will be out of town the 23rd of February. I would love to be here to participate in this.
This 26th of
20
January.
of February. If things get pushed out that far, I'm just saying, I'll be
Yeah.
here for the 9th, but the 23rd I won't be.
This is the 26th we're talking about.
I'm talking about February.
Okay.
He's looking into the future.
Okay. The only thing I think, the other thing that's important to remember is that we need this in place before we move on annexation.
Right.
So there's the other side of that. There's folks waiting on that as well. Not that.
And then the other,
You can bring it forward concurrently, though.
If we finally get to a place where we all are comfortable with, you betcha we can do that.
the other thing, accept other people's pleasure here. People have been here for a while, and although we really need to take our break at 6:30, could we put some time into the council meeting to let people talk to us?
Yep, we would take it at the first part during public comment.
Perfect, that would be wonderful, thank you.
And then, so there would be an action to pull the item off the consent.
I'm just gonna pull it.
Okay, yeah, and then, yep.
Okay.
We'll bring it back next time.
So, my apologies, you've sat here and got to listen to part of these conversations. We've got another meeting scheduled at 7 o'clock. We're going to break this one at this point. But what we will do is take the very first portion of the agenda on the 7 o'clock meeting, if you would like to stay, and make comment at that point. We'll take these into account as well in that early session. You can also expect that this will be back at the next workshop on the 23rd, right here at the 26th, at 5 o'clock again, and then at that point, we'll likely start getting to the point of hopefully maybe giving some direction to Mitch on when to bring it back for the actual public hearing itself. And that one, you're certainly welcome to speak at all of those. The public hearing is traditionally the one where we take most of the comment, but normally that kind of sort of gets it in just as we wrap up. And I want to make sure that you all have the opportunity before we get to the point of wrapping it up to get any concerns and comments and that type of stuff in on to the council as well for any considerations. So With that, I will adjourn this meeting. We'll be back here at 7. You can certainly stick around if you'd like. And we will take any comments that we would have on this at that point under public comments.
Gray hair and glasses.